Hello, everyone. My name is Preston Dennett, and welcome to a new episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. I call this episode How to Fly a UFO. This episode is all about one man's encounters with UFOs. His name is Tim. He does not want his last name used. He's been having encounters his whole life, many of them, and in this episode I'd like to cover just some of the major encounters, about 7 of them. And some of these encounters are experiences I really haven't heard before, and I think you'll find them quite interesting. So let's just start with Tim's first encounter, which occurred in 1971 or 72, thereabouts. He was 6 or 7 years old. At the time, he lived in New Iberia, Louisiana. And Tim went outside one evening around dusk to play in the front yard when a UFO dropped down out of the sky and hovered just above the street in his front yard. And I'll let Tim describe in his own words what he saw, because it's quite an unusual sighting. As Tim says, "I was standing at the very edge of the driveway and I could hear the TV in my house and in other people's homes. And I saw something that looked like not a blimp, but a long cigar shape with little windows on the downside of it. They were like little square portholes, and you could see light coming from the inside through these portholes. They were just lined down the side. It had so many in one section, and then there was a space with none, and then there was so many in another section. This thing was at least as long as a football field. It was just solid. It was barely floating above the road, and it was just very, very slow, like 1 mile per hour, moving forward." He first thought it was a train, but as Tim says, it wasn't a train, because then I realized it was floating. It was above the road, behind the tree line at the top of the hill, and I couldn't hear a sound from this thing. Maybe a slight hum, but that's it. It was floating. But it was barely moving forward. So this object moved forward and started to disappear from view, and then Tim did something he had never done before. He was forbidden to leave his yard, but he wanted to see where this thing was going. So he actually left the yard and walked up to the street to watch this thing move away. And as Tim says, at this point it started to rise and go above the tree line. It hesitated, stopped for about 10 seconds, and all of a sudden it just shot off so fast that the only way I knew what direction it went was because it left a streak of light. At that time, the only thing I knew that moved that fast were jets. I always said it jetted out of sight. Now I know a jet can't move that fast. There is nothing that can move that fast. So that was Tim's first experience, and it was about 10 years later, at age 15, that he had his second experience. And actually he had a whole series of them around that same time. But his second experience was also very unusual. He was at his stepfather's ranch in Indian Bayou, Louisiana, and I'll just let Tim describe what happened. "I remember going to bed that night. And the next thing I remember, I'm shivering and I'm cold and it feels like I'm wet. I opened my eyes and everything was dark. I'm looking down at something shiny and I realized it was water, but I didn't know where I was. I didn't understand what was happening. The whole time that I'm standing there, I felt like somebody was watching me. I was so scared that I was almost like paralyzed, but I was too afraid to move." Finally, he did move. He slipped and fell, and looking around, he could see that he was actually in the cattle field next to his stepfather's house. And this is where it was strange. There were no footprints. The only footprints that he could see were the ones from himself. He had made a few steps. There was no footprints leading into the cattle yard or outside of it. And besides that, the gate itself was locked. So there was no way he could have gotten there unless he was somehow dropped down from the sky. And as Tim says, that scared me. So I took off running. I ran through the gate, across the front yard to the house. When I got to the house, I went to the front door. It was locked. I went around the back to the sliding door in front of the swimming pool, and the sliding door was locked. Tim ended up having to go into the shed where he got a tool and was able to sort of jimmy the door open. So he was actually locked out of the house, which should be impossible. There's no way. So this is a clear-cut case of missing time, I would say. And that was the second experience. And the third experience came right on the tail of this second experience and involved a UFO sighting. And I'll just let Tim describe what he saw. He was actually with his siblings, and they were going swimming at the local watering hole. And Tim saw this weird-looking circular cloud. It was the only cloud in the sky, so that was unusual, and it looked strange. And then, as Tim says, it was a perfect circle. The cloud slowly dissipated, and as Tim says, now there was a round circular disc there. I remember looking at it, and I couldn't hear any noise, so I sat up and looked. When I sat up and looked, that thing took off. I mean, it shot off in the sky so fast. He was barely able to track it with his eyes, and when he finally saw it again, it was way off in the distance, and he could see it glinting in the sunlight. And he says, the excitement that you feel when you see that, the wonder and the awe, to see that thing take off and go across the sky, that's thrilling to see something like that. It's a big rush. So that was his third encounter. His siblings didn't see it, so he didn't tell anybody. He had kept all of his experiences secret. And it was just a short time after that Tim had his fourth encounter. And this was very unusual. He was in his home with his siblings, 3 of them, and a friend. So there's 5 kids in the house, and they were all in the living room dancing along to the radio when suddenly there was a loud bang, and this big glowing ball of light came in through the window and hovered in front of them and disappeared. As Tim says, a big electrical ball of energy came through the window into our living room and sat there, this bluish silver sparkling orb. It came through the window and floated right in front of the stereo. It didn't make any sound, and then all of a sudden it just dispersed right in front of us, like it just melted away. So all the kids saw it. It really freaked them out. Their first thought was that it must have been some sort of a lightning strike. They figured, well, perhaps lightning had struck the power pole in front of their house, causing this ball of energy to come into their home. And when their parents came home a short time later, they quickly told them what happened. And the parents took them outside and pointed out that it was actually a bright, sunny day. There was no storm systems anywhere near them. It could not have been lightning. And besides, the power pole itself was undamaged. So that really puzzled all of them, and none of them were able to explain it. But it was shortly after this that Tim started to remember what happened. Nobody else did. None of his siblings did, or his friend. But Tim had a second version of events of what happened when this ball of light came into the house. In Tim's second version, they were all dancing along to the music when suddenly everyone froze in place and the music stopped. It was as if they were all like statues. And this completely freaked Tim out. As Tim says, I looked to see why the music stopped, and I remember everything just froze, like time stopped. everybody stopped moving. We were all dancing around, and everybody just all of a sudden stopped. At this point, to Tim's amazement, 3 grayish figures started to come through the wall and the window of the house. As he says, I saw them coming through the walls, small tiny figures coming through the wall. 1 came through the side and 2 came through the window. And they looked like they were gray ghosts, like a gray, shadowy figure. I just remember they were small, and they were a dark grayish color, but not black. It's hard to explain. It looked like their molecular makeup and they themselves were vibrating extremely fast and hard. And as they came through the wall, they started to rematerialize. They were out of focus, and then they started to rematerialize. And I remember them taking me. And that's the last thing I remember. The next thing I remember is hearing the boom. We heard this boom and saw a big flash. And the next thing we know, this shiny, glowing orb, blue and silvery, kind of sparkly and staticky, came through the window. I have 2 separate memories of the same incident. I'm the only one who has 2 separate memories. Now, why do I have 2 separate memories of this same incident? So that was Tim's 4th encounter, and it was followed right on the heels by another encounter, Tim's 5th encounter, which again occurred at his stepfather's ranch in Indian Bayou. Each morning, Tim and his little brother had chores to bale hay, and they were both sitting on the hay wagon at precisely 6 a.m., waiting for their stepfather to come out, when Tim noticed that his little brother had forgotten his gloves. So Tim told him, go inside and get your gloves. Tim's little brother ran inside to get his gloves, and the next thing Tim knows, his brother and his stepfather come outside and they're really angry. They're asking him, where have you been? It's 7 o'clock. Where were you? We have been looking for you for an hour. Tim has no memory of where he was for an hour. As Tim says, I remember sitting there, waiting for my stepfather to come out. The next thing I know, my stepdad comes out and starts fussing with me. Where have you been? It's almost 7 o'clock. We're going to be late. Tim told him, I've been sitting right here. His stepdad said, no, you ain't been sitting out here. I came out here several times looking for you, and I couldn't find you nowhere. We've been looking all over for you. Where were you? I never got off the wagon, Tim insisted. And at that point, he felt an intense searing pain on the back of his leg, sort of at the hollow of his knee. And he quickly ran inside and removed his pants and saw that there was 2 deep scoop marks where the flesh had been cored out of his leg. They thought maybe he had sat on a nail or something, but his pants weren't torn. They even considered that possibly he had been bitten by a snake, a water moccasin or something. But that didn't make sense either. The flesh was actually missing. There was no hole in his pants. It bled for quite a while, but did quickly heal up. And it was something that they have never been able to explain. So that was his 5th encounter. And it wasn't long before he had a 6th encounter. His 6th encounter occurred 2 years later. He was 17 years old, and Tim and his friends decided to go to Lake Arthur, Louisiana, where there was an annual regatta of boats being held. And they were all on the beach, just laying in the sand, watching the girls go by. They had a few beers. And suddenly, the next thing Tim knows is it's no longer Friday afternoon. It's now Sunday evening, and he's waking up in bed at his cousin's house. He had lost more than a day, all of Saturday and most of Sunday. And as Tim says in his own words, my friends told me they couldn't find me for a day. On Saturday night, they found me lying on the beach, and they couldn't wake me up. They brought me back to the hotel room. They thought I was drunk. When they got up Sunday morning, they still couldn't wake me, so they put me in the car and they brought me back home. My cousins left me in the house, and they brought me and put me in my bed, and I woke up later that afternoon. Tim was mystified because while he had 1 or 2 beers, he was by no means drunk. And even if he was, his friends should have been able to find him. So that made no sense. He was missing for an entire day. As he says, I would have been on the beach. I mean, where did I go? So this, I think, is a good indication that these encounters are by no means psychological. That's twice now Tim was not where he was supposed to be, and people could not find him. So at this point, he's had 6 encounters, at least 4 of which involve missing time, and he started to have dreams of being on board UFOs. He was seeing grays, he was looking out the window, he could see the stars moving by really quickly as these objects were darting around real quickly in these darting patterns. And I'll just let him describe another dream where he saw a gray face to face. As he says, this is Tim's dream, I'm hiding in the barn and I see this creature coming toward me. And I hear the door open and I see this shadow coming in. And there's this bright light behind it. And I can see it had long skinny legs and long skinny arms. And then I can see the rest of the body. And I see this little tiny creature standing there. It looks just like an alien with the big black eyes and a big head. And he lifts his hand and points at me. So at this point, Tim was starting to get a clue of what was happening to him. At that time, there wasn't really much talk of aliens, so he's pretty much confused by the missing time incidents and did not know how to categorize them. But after he started having these dreams, he really began to wonder, are these dreams? What's going on with this missing time? What about this UFO sighting? And then he had another dream, and he got proof that it was not a dream at all because he had physical evidence. This is a very unusual encounter, and I'll just let Tim describe it in his own words. As Tim says, I had what I thought was a dream, where the aliens had taken me up into this spaceship and they had restrained me on a table. And they left the room and I got loose somehow. They hadn't restrained me fully and I got loose. And I got up and I started walking around. And when they noticed I was walking around, one of them came at me and I punched him in the head. His head was soft, like a beanbag almost. When I punched him in the head, he went down. I think it killed him. Suddenly I was fighting several of them. I was fighting them and I was beating them, physically hitting them. I remember one of them jumping towards me and he had like 3-4 fingers on each hand. I remember him jumping towards me. And then I remember seeing like 7 or 8 other ones right behind him and all coming at me at the same time. And I remember seeing his eyes, his big black eyes right in front of my face. And I remember going backwards, and that's the last thing I remember. So Tim woke up to find himself in bed and was wondering if this was a dream. And he looked down at his arm and he saw that he was wounded. He had a pretty deep scratch on his arm. As he says, I had a cut on my arm, like a scratch or a scrape. It took a long time to heal, but it did finally heal up. So by this point, he was starting to have not only dreams, but physical flashbacks of being on board a UFO. And he can describe exactly what these flashbacks were and what the inside of these UFOs looked like. As Tim says, I can tell you that the walls on the inside of this thing, from what I can recall, are absolutely smooth, like no texture to it whatsoever. Like you were rubbing not even glass, it was smoother than glass. Not really shiny, just silvery metallic looking. It was absolutely smooth. There were no creases, No joints like you would see in a normal wall, like where the walls meet together. It seemed like it was all just one piece, like it was all one. Another flashback he had is very interesting. I don't think I've ever heard anything quite like this. It's what Tim calls the waiting room, and I'll just let him describe it in his own words. As he says, "I'll tell you, it's really weird. The one thing on there that I remember was they had a room where they put you, and there were always several people in there. And it's funny, when you're there, you always know these people, humans. I don't recall any aliens being in that room. I have recollections of being in that room with several people that I knew very well. And it's a room where you can walk on the floor, or if you wanted to, you can just float in the air. You can fly around. You can float. It's like an anti-gravity room. But it wasn't, because if you wanted to walk on the floor, you could, just like you normally walked. But if you wanted to float in the air, you could. If you wanted to just fly across the room, you could. You could stop in the air, turn around, and fly back the other way. I think that what they did is have like a waiting room, and they would put you in there. And it was just so weird and strange and fun that you didn't think about being on a spaceship or having aliens out there. You were just enjoying the fact that you could float and fly around. What they would do is put you in there while they were running tests on someone else. Tim remembers being in this waiting room many times, and each time he recognizes the people there, but afterwards amnesia kicks in and he does not know who they are. As he says, as soon as it's over, you can't even remember these people's faces. Another really strange experience or memory flashback that Tim had was being on board a UFO in the control room. He was standing between two ETs, two grays, who were learning how to fly the UFO. And they were, in fact, telling Tim how to fly the UFO. And I'll just let Tim describe this experience, this memory, in his own words. As Tim says, "I'll tell you, it's really weird. A bunch of UFOs dancing around the sky and playing tag. I mean, being inside the UFO when that was going on. I'm watching through the main view window as this goes on. There were two little aliens, little grays, sitting at the controls, controlling this thing. And I understood what they were saying. I could understand. And to me, it's like they were laughing, like they were playing a game. It was like a training exercise, but they were playing a game and having a good time. They were talking about that one over there, and what that ship did, and what this one did over here, and what they needed to do to get it. It was like they were on teams, and they were scoring points. The two aliens that were flying the ship at the time seemed like they were young and not very experienced, because they were debating over what maneuver to do, what sector to go into, how to come around on this side, whether to go up or down and around, or whether to go straight across and then come around on this side. Tim got a really good look at the interior of the ship at this point, and I'll just let him describe what the inside of a UFO looks like. As Tim says, the main view window came up and back like it was on a slanted wall. It's not really a window, it's more like a projected screen on the wall that just pops up so they can see everything that's going on outside. They can put that view window on any part of the wall and see through any portion of the wall, or they could make the whole thing transparent, where you could see what's going on outside. At one point, I remember I was on there and we were out in space. We were moving away from the Earth, and I remember this thing going transparent. I was looking down, and it was like there was nothing under my feet. I felt like I was being hung by a thread and just hanging there, and I was out in the middle of space. I remember I started hyperventilating, just freaking out. Tim says that the room itself was not very large, and it was hard for him to tell because the walls kept turning transparent. As he says, I could see the control panel and the two seats and them sitting there. And there was also this center portion. I'm trying to think of what they call it on the ship. The control room, the pilot room. It's a round room, and right in the center there's a big column that's maybe 10 to 12 feet in diameter, and it's right in the center of that room. Now, whenever this thing goes transparent, that thing doesn't go transparent. It stays where you can see it, but it's on the inside of the ship. Just the outer walls of the UFO went transparent. I was always standing behind them, kind of like I was standing at a station. Sometimes they would show me things to do. Now, I would never operate anything. They would just show me how it worked or explain things to me. Ask me today, I can't tell you anything about it. Actually, I couldn't tell you anything about it as soon as it was over. So those are most of Tim's major encounters. He grew up to become a sheriff's deputy, a security officer at a casino, a sports instructor, a water safety instructor. He continued to see UFOs hovering over his house, and he also started having some other unusual experiences. He would occasionally have out-of-body experiences. He had a few ghostly encounters. And he also started developing a real strong interest in science, in astrophysics, in electromagnetics. This is something we do see with contactees, and it certainly turned up in Tim's case. And he kind of wonders if this is a result of his encounters. As he says, I don't know if you would call them memories or ideas and thoughts about quantum physics and electromagnetic propulsion type things. I have no education or training in these types of fields, yet I have an understanding about it I can't explain, and I have ideas about it. I just recently found out that one of the pictures that I would constantly get in my head was a cylindrical-looking metal object with a bunch of holes drilled all over the place in it. In my mind, that is the outer core. The inner core is a solid rod of pure magnetism which floats in the center of this cylindrical metal object, and this thing spins extremely fast on the inside of a drum and produces an enormous amount of electricity. I can't tell you when they showed me or how they explained it, but I know I have these ideas in my head. And when I hear people talking about things, I think, no, that's wrong, that's not going to work, or they got that wrong. Or I'm thinking, hey, they're on the right track. So Tim's story is one of 15 cases I present in my book, Onboard UFO Encounters. I find Tim's case extremely interesting because his case shows that this is definitely not psychological phenomena if he is missing while people are looking for him. He has physical evidence not only for having disappeared for hours or even a day at a time, but there was that incident in which he had scoop marks taken out of his leg. So it's clear this is a physical experience if he's being locked out of his house and so forth. It's also interesting because he talks about the waiting room, which is another very unusual type of incident on board a UFO that I don't believe I've ever heard before. I was also intrigued by the fact that he described these ETs as being like teenage ETs who are learning how to fly a UFO. Makes me wonder about all the times we see UFOs or hear reports of UFOs dancing around in the sky, moving at right angles, or even chasing cars down the street. Maybe this is because they are teenage aliens. Another intriguing aspect of Tim's encounter is when he was able to break free from paralysis while apparently being physically examined, and he attacked the Greys and actually punched them in the face. I have several cases like this. This is precisely what Travis Walton also reported and used similar terms to what Tim describes. So these are all details that I think lend a certain level of corroboration to his experience. It's a very interesting case, and that's why I wanted to present it here in this episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. I want to thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. And until next time, keep searching for the truth and keep having fun.